There it is. The Zabel 700. There's the Maico 620 next to it. The Maico 700 right there. And over here you have the Maico 660. So all in a row here. Well, I did try to enter this in the one motorcycle show, but it didn't get accepted in there, so it's not been ridden yet. It hasn't been ridden for a while. I actually have a blood clot in my leg, so I have to take blood thinners now, so I'm not going to be able to ride until probably June. One issue I have to fix is I got to take off that hydraulic clutch right there and seal it up a little better. The motor oil is leaking out from that bearing that's under there. So I have to take those bolts out and seal it up a little more. But other than that, it's pretty good. Flooded it. Great. Well, when it comes to these bikes, the one question always comes up, or the one thought is it the same. So first off, they are derivatives of the same base engine. You know, the original Mako engine dating back to 85, I would say, because of the bolt patterns. 85, 86 is where they both originated from, and then they developed from there. In 1990, they completely diverged, because before then, Mako was working with Zabel to enhance the engines for Zabel. And Zabel went off on their own in 1990 and developed their own engines, which were exactly the same Mako engines, just with the Zabel top end. Now, when we look at the modern Zabel, you can see that the modern Zabel does have the removable side cover. This is Zabel on it, though. See? And it does have thicker cases, a different type of cylinder, thick head, and it also has dual spark plugs. You can see in there. The Mako, on the other hand, it has thick cases, just not as thick as the Zabel's. It's a round face here, it says Mako on it. It is a single cylinder. Single spark plug. They're all single cylinders. Now, a lot of parts still bolt on, like the kickers and things like that. The piston's the same. It's just that the Zabel's a true 700 with the longer stroke, and the Mako is a 685. Now, the other thing is that Mako has the case, has the cylinder induction there. On the cylinder, it has a smaller intake. The Zabel has a larger intake, and it is case inducted. See, it's not on the cylinder. So those are the bigger differences. The last difference is that the Makos are a 5-speed, and the Zabels are a 4-speed. And the Makos come in Enduro gearing, and they come in MX gearing. So those are the main differences. Now, so it's definitely not a modern engine. Now, if you go back far enough, Zabel did make a 685 back in the 90s, and it was a 5-speed, Didn't come in Enduro, and MX only came in 1 gear set, but it also still was a dual spark plug head. I don't think they ever made one that was single spark plug. Also, they weren't hydraulic clutch. As far as I know, this is 700s had hydraulic clutch. So for the most part, even as far as this engine's concerned, there wasn't an exact Zabel match set up from a long time ago. Now at the same time, the same person who worked on both of these engines, and tuning them, was Hua Power. So, this one was designed later for Supermoto though, as well as can be used for sidecar and everything else, and kart racing and stuff like that. But but as far as the modern engines go, determining if they have the same port timings and everything, who knows? You'd have to take it apart and figure it out. But it really doesn't matter. For the most part, you can consider that Mako is not the same engine as Zabel. They're close. They're kind of cousins. Same type of design. Most people who developed it. But by now, the latest engines are completely different. Like I said, as far as not completely different, but different enough that they're not the same engine. Right? True 700, case induction, 4-speed, all up. MX and Enduro, single spark plug, cylinder induction, smaller intake. So you can take it for what it is, but they're not the same engine. They're not even made by the same person right now, right? These are made by Kawasakis in Germany. The Zabels were being made by Zabel, and it looks like they may be soon be made by somebody else, but they are not, they are not the same. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do here is just a little speed test. I mean, we're not really going to race these, but we are going to compare them with the technical data, meaning the gearing within these bikes. And I'm going to say that you can pretty much boil down any engine to a percentage, and that percentage will dictate the performance of that engine, provided you know the maximum RPM. Ignoring acceleration, ignoring the power, and just saying that, assuming you can set up any secondary drive, and you want to compare two bikes that are mostly even, like these two are very even, then all you need is a percentage, because you can put the same secondary drive on. So assuming you can do that, and you would always do the optimal, then whoever has the higher percentage is obviously going to be the faster engine. And we'll also compare it with the Mega engine. I'll put the Mega engine in here as well, as I said, because I get a lot of comments on it and I get a lot of emails for it, so we'll add that one in. But so what I mean by this percentage is that it's a percentage of the RPM. So the engine's always rotating at a specific RPM, and that rotation is transferred out the output shaft, and that output shaft transfers it back to the rear wheel. Well, the secondary part we don't care about, because we can always, like I said, change it up for everybody. What we care about is what percentage that output shaft is, because then I can say for any RPM, that's the percentage of the RPM that's out the output shaft. And how we're going to figure this out is differently than you normally see people figuring out gears, which is the number of rotations that the first gear needs to do to turn the second gear, which is your ratio, like 1.9 or 2.3. Instead, we're just going to have 50%, 60%, 125%, whatever those percentages are. Right? So essentially, you're going to be figuring out what the transfer is between the crank and the main shaft to the output shaft. One thing I wanted to note here is this is a Zabel engine, and I counted the gears on this, and it is 33. Or not the gears, the teeth. Teeth is 33 on that. There's a Zabel engine in there. Let's see. Here, there's the cases in there. So, anyhow, just wanted to get that part out of the way because I'm going to go into the details now. And first we'll review all three of these engines, and then we'll go into the details of the calculations. So here's the Zabel engine to start off with. You will notice that this is the same engine I have. It's a ZM29. This is technical data. We have the gear ratios down there, and we have two primary drive ratios. I do not have the GP version as far as I know. I did not buy the GP version as far as I know, so we'll ignore that one. And that one's actually a slower bike because it has a 2.3 or 2.23 primary drive ratio with a 67-30 setup. Now, the first primary drive you'll see is a 1.96 ratio, but that's actually incorrect. 66 and a 31 ratio for the primary drive is actually 2.13, which is used on some older Maicos, like in 1983, but they switched to the 1.96 ratio, around 85 or 86. So, and that ratio is what the Maico has, the newer Maicos have, which is a 65 tooth and a 33 tooth. So this says 66-31 tooth. Now the other Zabel engine I have, which is not a ZM29, but it does have a 33 tooth crank sprocket. Now, one of these two is wrong. I don't know which one, but since the ratio is the same as the Mako, just to make it fun, I'll just take what these gears are, whether it's a misprint or not. So we'll just go with that, 66-31. Which, as I remember before, was 2.13. And this is a rotation of 47%, meaning that you get 47% of the crank rotations to the main shaft. Now, each of these gears down here, they all have their own ratios, and they all have their own rotation percentages. Now, if we look at the final drive here, the fourth gear with the primary drive, and the fourth gear here, which is 115%, we have the final output as being 54%, meaning that with this setup, you will get 54% of the rotations out the rear wheel for any given RPM, for your RPM range, which, you're not going to get up to here on this thing. You might, around here is where you're going to be. So with this setup and, with this primary, secondary drive here, you're going to get, somewhere almost around 75 to 80 miles per hour. Again, peak horsepower is in the mid 6,000s. So, and this here doesn't matter. We're only caring about this because we can set this up however we want with whatever tire we want. So 54% is the Zabel 700 engine. And this here is the data for the Mako 700, which you can see on Costa's website. If you go under the engine and look at the specifications, you'll find it there. And it is as expected. The gearing is actually, for this version, which appears with the MX gearing, it appears that second through fifth are the exact same ratios as the Zabel's first through fourth. You will notice that, as expected, the crank gear is 33 teeth and the clutch is 65 teeth, and this is as expected. It's the same ratio as was counted on the 660 Mako I have, and so this is the definitely what's expected for the newer Maicos. So here we have them lined up. Now, given that we've said before that we don't really know what the Zabel's supposed to be, given the misprint, but you can see that if they were the same, as it may be this is the same here as this one, which means it'd be exactly the same. But since I went with the smaller ratio just to get a difference here, the Maico is faster then. assuming the same RPM range and everything like that, then the Maico has 58.4% of the RPMs out the output shaft, whereas the Zabel only has 54%. And again, you can ignore this because I can change this to any ratio. This is a 4-0 ratio, which is kind of lower, but you can see at that ratio, you're looking at that kind of a range there, up to maybe 87. Whereas up here, you're looking at up to 80. Now another ratio here is this one here, and so I paste that in. So that gives you a much lower ratio there, and this is what should be around the stock ratio for this bike, which would bring you up to about 92. And if you paste that up here, you end up with 85. So 85 to 92. So again, it doesn't matter. Assuming same tire size, assuming that you can switch the secondary drive out and the power can pull it, and you reach the same RPM range, you can figure out. Or if you reach a different RPM range, you can still figure it out. I mean, just by multiplying the RPM range and seeing what the rotations are here. So, in this round here, the Maico, presumably faster or the same as the Zabel, given they have, the difference is their primary drive, and again, that's possibly a misprint, or they lowered it in the ZM29 when they had it as this ratio in the previous ones. So, all right. So, finally, before I get comments about this, this is the engine data I have gotten from Mega Engine's website. I will note that the Mega has been bought out by another company, so they are being built somewhere else than the original here, just recently apparently. But the primary drive here is 24 teeth 65, so it does have the same 65 teeth as the Maico, but it has a lower tooth on the crank sprocket. And then we have the gear ratios, and then we have the sprockets to use, but we don't care about the sprockets. Again, we can just assume we can change them to anything. So we're just going to go with this data and see what it looks like. All right, so here is the Mega 700 data. Their crank and clutch primary drive was 2.71. With I mentioned before, the 24 tooth crank with the same teeth, which is 65, is the Maico, which is 36%. Now they do have, if we just look at the top gear, they do have a higher ratio for their fourth gear, which is 0.82 ratio and a 122% scale up from the primary drive. And so, to reveal what the percentage is 45%. So, if this is all correct, then essentially this does mean that they're much lower than the Maico or the Zabel. Even with the Zabel's smaller ratio, the Zabel was about 7 to 10 miles an hour slower. Or this here, assuming that this is what they would get to, is significantly slower. But let's say we put the 14 tooth on, and we bump it up, a little bit here. So, again, we actually bump these down, 14, 48, 53, but let's say that it went with 1648. This is actually the stock for the Sand Spider. And the Sand Spider did 115 stock. So we'll actually put this through on all of them. We'll put this very, very high gearing. So because because 45% and everything's equal, it's no matter what you do, as long as you're doing the same primary drive setup or secondary drive setup, this bike will be slower. So top speed on the technical data, we have no idea how fast it accelerates or anything like that, or what RPM range it gets to, based on we're assuming this because it has the same peak horsepower in the 6,000s. So here we're doing 89 miles per hour with this setup on the Zabel with the 3166. We're doing 107. Now again, the question is whether it can actually reach that, because this is again going to be a different pull than this one. So in some cases it could be to the advantage depending on how high this thing goes, but and we'll do it with this one here. So what I mean is the taller these are going to be, the acceleration is going to change. And so there may be a configuration where this one could get to a higher RPM faster than these would to that same RPM, just because this gearing is too tall. Because again, it's going for this huge, but again, it's it's all speculation there. This is going to do 116, pretty much the Mako as expected there. So so this is the setup here. So 58% for the Mako. So whatever RPM range you're at, you're getting 58% out the output shaft. The Zabel, 58% for the Mako. The Zabel, it could be 58%, it could be 54%. We have no idea. The specs in the thing have a complete misprint. The Mega, they are at 45%. And if you look at the CR500, it has also the same type of ratio. It has a 50% ratio. So the CR500 technically would get a higher speed. Again, we're ignoring acceleration, ignoring what RPM range they're going to go to, assuming the same RPM range. The CR500 would get has 50% at the output. So 50% would be greater than the Mega, but less than the Mako. So anyhow, that's the speed numbers, or really the percentage that we're looking at here. So, and again, we can take a look at these numbers. And then, by the way, if you go online and you find something called the motorcycle gear ratio spreadsheet, and you try to put these numbers in to get these numbers, you're not going to get them, because there is a small error in their spreadsheet. You'll get about this, but you may see some of this percentages off. You may see a mile per hour faster or slower, or rounded down wrong. And it's because they rounded their numbers in a certain way. Plus, they ask you to input this number directly. Depending on how you input it, instead of doing this actual division, you're going to get some rounding problems with the numbers, and so you're not going to get exactly this. So these are more accurate numbers just based on the math. They have rounded up several things, including their conversion from mile per hour to kilometer, making it slightly faster, because they are actually not doing the full calculation for that conversion. So, and that would be this spreadsheet here. This is the one that I am talking about. So if you see this, the numbers are roughly accurate. I mean, we're just talking mathematics here. Right? I mean, when you get to the dirt, there's lots of things that can, change the numbers as far as up or down. But as far as the, tire could spin more and you go slower. But as far as if you're trying to compare it against my spreadsheet, you'll have to correct that spreadsheet first if you want to get my exact number. So I did the best I could with the data I had, and so that's what they come out to. One last thing we'll have to fix on this bike here is that this hydraulic clutch, the seal is leaking oil from the engine, not from the hydraulic system, from the engine itself. And so I'm going to have to take that off and seal it better, put it back on so it's not leaking engine oil out. How I know it's leaking engine oil, because it didn't leak until I put engine oil in the bike. Yeah, and this isn't having any problems. It's just that that thing goes in front of a bearing there, and that bearing just opened right there. There's supposed to be a seal around it. That's just not working as well, so I want to see about sealing it up better.